Star Trek might be sold to Netflix. Or to be more precise, it's not just Star Trek, but the entirety of Star Trek's parent company, ViacomCBS, that might be sold to Netflix. In other words, if Netflix were to acquire ViacomCBS, and they just might, then they would get Star Trek included with the package. In this editorial, I will go through why ViacomCBS might be up for sale, why Netflix might be interested in picking them up, and if it were to happen, what it might look like and mean for Star Trek. Before we get into whether or not ViacomCBS and Star Trek with it is for sale, let's do a very brief recap of our earlier coverage just to get anyone who came in late up to speed. Back in 2005, Sumner Redstone, the majority owner of the Viacom Corporation, which at the time was the corporate owner of both Paramount Pictures and CBS, did a bold move. He went against what everyone else was doing, namely collecting several companies under one corporate ownership. Instead, he split up the Viacom Corporation into two separate corporations to better reflect what the underlying companies were doing. From the old Viacom Corporation, two new corporations emerged. The CBS Corporation, owner of everything CBS and CBS related, and a new Viacom Corporation, owner of everything Paramount related. Fast forward a decade and a half, and the long fight of Sumner's daughter, Shari Redstone, to reunite the kingdom her father split up was successful. In late 2019, the new Viacom Corporation and the CBS Corporation were merged back and became ViacomCBS. However, the two merging corporations had not developed equally since being split 15 years earlier. CBS had prospered, while Viacom had floundered. In the merger, Viacom was market capitalized at $12 billion, but it came with a debt of $18.7 billion. Following the merger, the newly remerged ViacomCBS was valued at $25 billion, but it still had that $18.7 billion debt to repay. Take note of this, for it is vital in understanding what comes next. Here's the thing with debt. Every company has some level of debt, or gearing, which up to a point is profitable and beneficial, as it allows for more cash working towards generating revenue than the company would have without that debt. ViacomCBS is of course way beyond that point where the debt is beneficial, but as long as their revenue covers repayment installments, they're good. One of the Department of Justice's requirements for allowing the merger to go through was that the new company would be more fiscally sound than both merging companies, and that all debt would be paid off. A plan was presented on how to grow the new company, increase revenue, and repay all debts. This plan, by all accounts, held up to Department of Justice scrutiny, and so the merger was allowed to go through. However, that plan did not take into account that thanks to what is, at best, negligence from the CCP, the economy of the entire Western world would be forcibly shut down. As a result, the revenue stream generated by nearly every single one of ViacomCBS's various ventures, that under normal circumstances would have covered both operational expenses and debt repayments, dried up to a pittance, and they will remain that way for the foreseeable future. The debts still have to be repaid though, and to this end, a bill of nearly $800 million is due in the very near future. ViacomCBS have raised the cash for that, but by taking on even more debt. So really, they've only kicked the can a bit further down the road, but at the cost of making the problem even greater. Many companies are facing financial calamity in these days. One way of averting, or at least delaying financial disaster without taking on new debt, is by way of issuing new shares. This, however, assumes the market has faith in the company at hand, and in the case of ViacomCBS, this is not the case. On the contrary, the ViacomCBS shares are now trading at such low levels that the market value of the company as a whole is only 10 billion. You will note that this is less than what Viacom alone was valued in the acquisition. And on top of that, the debt has now grown to 20 billion. In other words, over the past couple of months, market value, the equivalent of the previous trading price of the entire CBS corporation, has been wiped out. What this means is that the market currently values the entirety of ViacomCBS, with all of its assets, including all the TV networks, all the upcoming movies, the entire movie and TV series catalog, the entirety of the Star Trek brand, the entirety of every other brand in their portfolio, all of it, at an accumulated 10 billion. Against that backdrop, it's even bad business to section anything out and sell off separately, which would be their other means of raising funds. To that end, they already have announced that they're selling off their publishing division, Simon & Schuster. But to our awareness, there are no interested buyers, certainly not at the price point that ViacomCBS would ask. Meanwhile, nothing prevents their market value from sinking even further, and at some point, the debt collectors are going to come for National Amusements itself, the company through which the Redstones actually own ViacomCBS. Although ViacomCBS is undervalued right now, and National Amusements would get a pittance for it compared to what they would get in a normal situation, this is no normal situation. If they haven't got the cash to keep the debt collector away for, well, however long this situation lasts, and life and subsequent revenues return to what they were before, the Redstones might not have any choice but to sell now. Rumor has it that Netflix is interested in acquiring ViacomCBS. Grace Randolph was, to my awareness, the first to report it, and while nothing is official or done at this point, it does correspond with what we have heard from our sources. As usual, treat this as rumor, can't stress that enough, as it can in no way be corroborated at this point in time. But what we have heard is that Netflix are very interested in acquiring ViacomCBS, reportedly even in a hostile takeover if it should come to that. If it did, there would be a certain irony to it, as Sumner Redstone himself was happy to engage in hostile takeovers while building his empire. Chances are, though, it wouldn't come to that. If a deal can be reached, what we are hearing is that Shari Redstone would take a huge payout and walk away, rather than risking both ViacomCBS, National Amusements, and her personal fortune, and in the current situation, all of those are on the line. She is even being personally sued for having forced the merger in the first place. Selling the problem would be a very easy way out. So why would Netflix want ViacomCBS? Easy, for their catalog and for parts of their film and TV series production and distribution infrastructure. The streaming wars are in progress, and while Netflix is still on top, content is king, and they need more of it to stay there. Between Viacom and CBS, Netflix would get a lot of content to help them fend off the competition. Netflix are also in debt. But as I said before, as long as it's not crippling debt, debt is the cost of business and the cost of expanding. I do not have the numbers to do a detailed ratio analysis on Netflix, but I think we can safely assume that their business has been booming as of late. So paying for ViacomCBS and taking on their debt should be well within their means, especially in light of all the entertainment assets and brands they would get for a price that could be described as a steal. So, let's say that some kind of deal can be reached. What could it look like? If this happens, which it might not, but if it does, there are many forms such an acquisition could take, but I think two stand out as more likely. One option is that Netflix just acquires ViacomCBS in its entirety. But if they did, I think they would split off the parts of the company that they don't want and sell them off further. Like, I don't see Netflix entering the broadcast TV business anytime soon, or even the publishing business with Simon & Schuster. So there, I'd imagine they take the brands that they want and then resell the networks and network infrastructure. But you can bet they'd keep the brands they'd want. They'd also likely keep Paramount to have a theatrical distribution wing, to get Netflix movies qualified for Oscars, if nothing else. Alternatively, and this I think is much more likely, is that we would see something more akin to what Fox did with Disney. As you might recall, Fox only sold their entertainment division to Disney. The Murdochs kept Fox News and the national sports channels. While the sports aren't doing too hot right now, their news division is doing great, so that worked out pretty well for them overall. I could see Netflix and ViacomCBS reaching a similar deal, something where Netflix gets most of Viacom and their entertainment assets, plus key CBS assets. Like Star Trek, but where ViacomCBS keeps their TV infrastructure, sports deals, and more associated with CBS. It is, by the way, under a scenario such as this that a stakeholder like Secret Hideout can be bought out. If Netflix were to buy ViacomCBS wholesale, they'd get all the contracts and their obligations along with them. So for something like Star Trek, nothing would change in the short term. If you are in it for Star Trek, then some variety of a partial Netflix takeover is what you should be rooting for. And on the topic of Star Trek, our sources have always been very clear that while Netflix passed on Picard, they've never had an issue with the Star Trek brand itself. The source of their discontent was always Alex Kurtzman and Secret Hideout's mismanagement of the Star Trek brand, on Netflix dime, no less. So if Netflix wanted to do something more with Star Trek, chances are they wouldn't want either Alex Kurtzman or Secret Hideout to be part of it. But again, all of this is speculation, aimed only at giving you an idea of what the different forms of a whole or partial Netflix buy-in into ViacomCBS could look like. In any event, for ViacomCBS, in this situation, Netflix just might represent a lifeline. Time will tell how the chips will fall down. But till then, what would you like to see happen? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to check back soon for a similar analysis on what Apple acquiring Disney might entail, because now that is also well within the realm of possibility.